It's good to have the opportunity today, though, to go down a diversification path, and I guess my involvement here today is just to tell a quick story, I guess, as to how the Pilbara Ports Authority has been involved, or our involvement as a partner in rejuvenating the livestock trade from the Pilbara. Probably say right from the outset that we're only one small link in that actual industry. So, but we're certainly very proud that we've been able to rejuvenate to this state, and we'll take you through some slides very shortly. Basically an overview as I'll go through. A lot of the things in the first part, the Pilbara Ports Authority overview, we've seen through in those slides, so I certainly won't dwell on those. But I guess it just does bring up the locations, the statistics, and the cargoes, and certainly be remiss of me if I didn't mention some of the tonnages, and probably helps me get back into the door in Port Hedland when I get back. The boss always likes me to talk about those things as well. So we're going to talk about the history of livestock exports from Port Hedland. We heard earlier today some discussion on it as well, and livestock was one of the industries in the Pilbara, and particularly in Port Hedland that was around before iron ore in the area as well. So there's certainly a lot of history, and a lot of that can be spoken about by the pastoralists and those involved in industry better than I can. We'll talk about a few of the legislative and safety changes through there very briefly. Which has impacted, I guess, upon everybody in industry in the Pilbara. And then we're going to go down the path of some of the actions that we've undertaken, the involvement with industry to try and kickstart a reinvigoration in the livestock exports. A lot of other logistics come into play. And as we heard there a little bit earlier on in the sessions, we're expecting our first shipment for 2017 on Saturday to go out of Port Hedland, so we're very happy that that's been able to occur. And once again, then we'll move on to some longer term options. Fairly busy slide, this one, but it pretty much encompasses everything that was mentioned through there in the video, through some of the large figures. Particularly the 500 million, or as our CEO likes to put it, 500 million tonnes through the port. But more pleasing, I suppose, for this session is some of the other innovations, certainly involvement in our mangrove projects, the seedling projects, people getting out around the schools and getting community involved in those projects. Just under 1,000 people involved in 8 schools, which has been sensational. Obviously, we're very proud of our lost time injury rates, currently run at 0, have been for a year and counting. And I guess on this one, sort of innovation and some newer industries on the right-hand side of that slide. We mentioned lithium there before, or spodumene ore that we're shipping out at the moment. We have exported just over 1.2 million tonnes of that so far this year, and are talking to obviously a lot of customers with regard to lithium through the port. But also in there, bringing it back onto track, I guess, is the rejuvenation of livestock, which is certainly something we want to see occurring in the Pilbara and in Port Hedland in particular. Some of the locations there, and just when it was in the introduction, I suddenly feeling I might have to get a new car partway through the year, I think, with some of the travel that's going to have to be undertaken. The ports that have come under the banner thus far, Ashburton has already come online within the marine team. The Landside operations team will have an involvement down there probably about this time next year. And then there's the various other shipping and pilotage agency ports and other greenfields projects. I guess with that slide, with the livestock presentation, all of the inland area from those major ports is where we're looking at, and obviously drawing on the Pilbara herds to use Port Hedland as a gateway out of the country. Once again, a pretty quick overview there through the ports, berths inside the port, 19 operational berths inside Port Hedland Harbour. We're using 3 of those on the eastern side of the port for all general cargoes, multi-user berths, and that's where we're intending to have livestock exports to be able to be handled from all 3 of those berths. You see, obviously, iron ore dominating the trade there through. Livestock comes under the other there, and we're hopeful that we'll get some rather large figures in that as we head forward. History of livestock exports from Port Hedland, as I say, have been around for a long time. I first went up to the Pilbara in early 80s, and livestock was being exported out of Port Hedland then. It's been exported in various volumes, various quantities over those years. We've had a downturn of exports in Port Hedland itself over the last few years, and hence the desire to reinvigorate and diversify the trade. But I guess we'll sort of reiterate that we've always opened for business for livestock. 2005, when we extended berth 2 on the end of berth 1, we actually put in a wedge in the berth which could accommodate loading of livestock for the ramp to be able to be used at lower tides. And that's where we have designed some of the new infrastructure to accommodate that area. We do have the existing capacity in the port at the moment for livestock exports, but we have, made a commitment through to industry to improve some of our infrastructure, taking on some advice on safety, some of the changes that have been required, and obviously some efficiencies that we can see with the new infrastructure itself. Very quickly on legislation and some of the changes, it's probably no different than anybody else in the room has had to accommodate. The Occupational Safety and Health Act is what we will operate under for livestock exports. Probably one of the myths, I guess, dispelled early on in the piece. Port Hedland very much mining orientated. I actually am the registered manager for the port, and so I'm well aware of the Mine Safety Inspection Act, but the livestock activities will be undertaken in accordance with OSH Act, and basically there will be no relevance to the Mine Safety Inspection Act. So some of the other changes, I guess, through security legislation that's come on board and various offshoots, and I guess like government departmental name changes, some of these acts and regs change as well. What used to be easy as the Matofsa Act, but we've put an R in there for regulations now. But it's basically the legislation that requires you to wear a blue MSIC card on the wharf, in the same way that those involved in the airline industry have a red one for tarmac activities. So the bearing that has on livestock, etc., is obviously we like to undertake anything we do in a safe manner. And also the fact that security plans all the ports in Australia, it's federal legislation, so it's not a port requirement, it's a federal requirement, and so we must be compliant with that. So obviously people who want to access berths have to be compliant with those regulations and acts. So we ensure that happens for livestock in the same manner as we would for any other cargo. Getting on to some of the actions, I guess, that we've taken through. 2015, I guess we made a decision to get actively involved in rejuvenating it, reinvigorating the trade through there, and we presented an options paper. And once again, I guess with in combination with the Pilbara Development Commission, we presented that through respective boards, and we came up with, three options there that we, or three recommendations, I should say, that we would use. Port Hedland would be our preferred berth, or preferred port for loading of livestock, that we would upgrade our equipment in the short term, and we'd also look for some longer term investment in the port through there, and identified that Lumsden Point would be an ideal place for longer term activities. From there we moved into a forum. We hosted a forum in Port Hedland in December 2015. We had about 50 or 60 people in attendance. It was a good turnout. Representation from pastoralists, from exporters, from shipping agents, from those involved in industry, regulators, veterinary, quarantine, and port environments. Some good discussions through there. Presented our case, took on board a lot of information and recommendations, and then set about a plan as to how we would move forward to try and to reinvigorate, and I guess to accommodate that second dot point form of improved infrastructure in the port. Took a trip up to Darwin in February 2016. That was very early in the piece identified as, a benchmarking from those involved in industry. So we attended there with some from industry and export agencies, viewed some of the infrastructure there, see how it operated in that port, any learnings we could have, and then looking at how we could bring back that type of benchmarked infrastructure to Port Hedland. Some of the places we visited up there and involvement with them, the quarantine facilities and export depots, involvement with Darwin ports at the same time. Going the right way here. Which brought us down to, I guess, some new infrastructure in the port. Port Hedland, I guess, has evolved, over 100 years or more. The berths, I guess a lot of people I find scratching their head sometimes when they come down to the eastern side public berths and wondering why you'd put something in a particular location. And I guess it's an evolution of 100 years where any new project in Port Hedland, anything that's been built in Port Hedland or the Pilbara area over time has come in across those berths or has been exported across those berths if it hasn't been for one of the major iron ore players. So we had to take some of the information that we found and then try to work out how it would fit in with Port Hedland. And without boring you with too many statistics, it's always nice to have a large flat area similar to the stage here to be able to assemble things and to drive trucks onto and to have animals run off. However, what we have in Port Hedland is a series of berths which have evolved with about a 22 metre depth on them apron-wise. So certainly some logistical challenges there in accommodating triple road trains onto limited space on a berth, having them line up with a particular loading ramp, have that loading ramp being able to line up to a particular vessel, and those, I guess, involved in shipping know that vessels come in many shapes and forms. So they were some of the logistics that we had to overcome and that we engaged with others, the specialists in industry, to try and overcome. So we engaged with our engineers on a design, fairly straightforward process there. We did consult with industry on it, showed them some of the plans, got some additional ideas, crossed some things out, added some things in. Finally then commenced on a process of construction of the new infrastructure. And I guess of recent times we have some on-site testing, and I guess more the case the on-site testing if the infrastructure has arrived, lots of different surfaces on the berth and lots of different areas, as well as just making sure that it's going to be functional on the berth and to able to be fit for purpose. Some photos now, I guess, of what we are. It's and look, always a little bit difficult to see what's going on here, but effectively it's a modular type ramp. Comes in about 6 different modular pieces which all connect together and can be therefore used on different parts of different berths through the port. It's a multi-level unloading ramp, so it can line up to both decks of a double-decker trailer, and obviously then down to the loading ramp which attaches to the ship. Couple more pictures of it there. It has a hydraulic ramp which can maximise the use of the tide. I guess in Port Hedland we experience up to 7.5 metre tidal ranges there. So they're, like all northern ports, there are some times where it's absolutely impossible to load certain cargoes on certain ships. But obviously we wanted a design on this ramp so we could, the ups and downs of the tide, we could also be going up and down at the appropriate time. A little bit hard to see on this one, but in the shadow up against the vessel there is a cut-out wedge on the edge of the berth, which allows that ramp to go down to about minus 15 degrees. So when the tides are low or the vessel is going down in the water, we can still keep loading over a period of time. This opportunity presented itself with a vessel alongside, not doing cargo, doing some work in the holds, and we were able to actually take the ramp down there and line it up against the vessel and get a much better visual picture for those that were likely to be involved in the process. Similarly, again, that's the ramp down at the bottom of its range, or towards the bottom of its range. As we said, there's lots of other logistics that are involved. Basically speaking, the livestock have got to get from where they're grazing to a holding yard, and then from the holding yard into the port to be loaded on through. To assist, I guess, with some of that, we're seeing the port of Port Hedland at the end of the road there. Part way out, if you follow the highway out just past Wedgefield, you see the Hedland Export Depot there. It's about 20 odd kilometres from town, so that's the assembly area, the holding yard for cattle. And I guess from the port perspective, our involvement starts from when they leave that yard coming into the port. So there's a lot of other work, a lot of other logistics involved beyond the Port Authority's control, but obviously a vital part, each one of them is a vital part of the process. Once again, this is probably something that I'm going to be responsible for, the traffic inside the port. As I say, we have 3 berths on the eastern side of the port, and we like to see those 3 berths all operating efficiently and all operating well at the same time. So we do have a lot of internal traffic management, which changes day to day, half day to half day, sometimes hour to hour, coordinated through safely. I guess those arrows there are just showing some of the ways that trucks would be able to come through to the berths. Some offer much simpler ways of trucks being able to line up with vessels. Some provide a few more challenges, but all of them trialled through the process and very able to be accommodated at either berth 1, 2 or 3. Which brings us to this slide. I guess we did some commissioning was completed of the loading infrastructure. We wanted to tell everybody about it, so we issued some media releases through. Some very wide interest from industry and from media in particular, and certainly from I guess local population in Port Hedland. Everybody very keen to see some diversification and new trades on the horizon. So very well received. We were fortunate to be able to, prior to this, be engaging with customers for export, and we've, as I said, secured a shipment for this weekend, Saturday morning, export from the port, 2,000 head of cattle which are going to be sourced locally from the Pilbara, and we're going to load them out through berth 2 using the new infrastructure onto, I guess, one of the smaller vessels that we'd expect to see taking the cattle to Indonesia. Longer term export options, Lumsden Point General Cargo Facility. As some would be aware of Port Hedland, there's already an area of about 135 hectares in total in different stages of development through there. But I guess the Pilbara Ports Authority certainly sees that as the future for the livestock industry, being able to accommodate larger volumes, larger ships, provide more variety, and also for a multitude of other products and commercial activities that's been discussed through here today. That design of the wharf, as I say, it's a greenfield project down there, so we can start afresh. We can actually hopefully avoid some of the issues that we now experience on the eastern side berths, and to be able to have larger trucks able to access different areas, to have holding yards in proximity to the berths which don't require a second handling of them to get there. And once again, I say for other cargoes as well, to be able to be accommodated in the same manner. If we can do that, it gives us modern, efficient facilities. It looks after animal welfare, provides another interest in the port, more employment and more diversification. As I said, well, thanks so much. That's probably the end of my session through. This just gives you a little bit of an idea circling around of where Lumsden Point is, just north of Wedgefield for those who are unfamiliar there with it. But obviously great access to the Great Northern Highway and ease off those major arterial routes. So, thank you very much for your time.